Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. All right, why don't you guys pray for me by singing along with me, gesturing at your screen, and hitting the dislike button on this video. I need some prayers before I head off to my job at the tutoring center. What had happened was that this has been a big fear of mine. I wanted to avoid telling anyone at the center about any health conditions that I have. But unfortunately, I have food allergies. One of my students had brought in an offensive food, offensive in terms of my allergies, not in terms of her eating it. I love that the students can enjoy themselves. Get that out of the way. But I had to excuse myself, and I I then quickly said a quick prayer to myself before excusing myself because situations like that have led to hostility at previous jobs. I was working at another tutoring center 3 years ago when I had a boss who was an immigrant, first generation immigrant, who didn't appreciate food allergies. And he wrote me up saying that I delivered bad customer service by complaining about our customers' food. And at the time, we had just returned from pandemic lockdowns, and I really didn't want to rock the boat on the job, so I just signed the write up without really much thought. And now looking back at it, yeah, I should have stood up for myself, but it was my only job after months of being cooped up and all that. I mean, I did. I wasn't tight on money, or I wasn't hurting for money or anything, but I was cooped up, and so I needed the socialization. And I don't think he intentionally exploited me for that, but it put me in an uncomfortable situation. Later on, only later on did I read up about things, and I won't say what country he comes from because but when I looked up, he probably didn't have much exposure to the concept of food allergies just because of the prevalence from his home country. Let's just put it that way. 7 years ago, I was working at a different university. I was teaching compiler design there. One day, I had to leave the building. What had happened was one of the custodians had broken a mercury light bulb, fluorescent tube kind of light bulb, about 4 feet. And I left in a hurry. A little bit of background: I am autistic, and I find that I have to be mindful of my exposure to heavy metals. Uh, when I was in Taiwan, I became a living meter of how high mercury was in various fish because within hours of eating fish that was heavily tainted in mercury, I would feel the symptoms. Fortunately, one meal of it I could usually detoxify from that, and I was eventually able to find a good source of tilapia that did not give me trouble. I didn't. I wish I had like some kind of a meter to measure. I was in it. One time I had ordered a bad batch of bismuth for casting, and so after working with it, I developed a huge headache, and I still couldn't figure out what it was though. I actually had a I'm very close with one of our local coin dealers, and he tested the bismuth. It was contaminated with tin, and tin usually doesn't give me that big of a problem though. So it was probably something that was so minor in that alloy that even his meter could, because his meter only goes down to 100 parts per million. So if it had a tiny amount of mercury or thallium or lead or maybe one of the radioisotopes, right? That's just how sensitive I am. And so when the mercury thermometer broke or the light bulb broke in the campus, I had to evacuate quickly. And I texted I had a mailing list. I texted the class. I apologized. There's been an emergency. We'll make up this class some other time. But the HR girl was very upset that I had left a disaster in the break room because of my haste to leave. And I don't know if it was the HR girl or somebody else. Somebody was really passive aggressive and left all the things I left in the break room in a cardboard box, including food that was going to rot. And when the HR girl confronted me about all this and I explained mercury and autism, she didn't know what mercury was, she didn't know what autism was, and she just laughed at me. And so I've learned the hard way that every time I've had any sort of medical drama like that at work, I'm on my own. And so last Tuesday, when I went to when my student brought the food, that I literally treated that as almost it was the beginning of a pink slip. Right, that was the first sentence of that pink. I literally, it was that, and it gave me a really bad vibe for the rest of the day. And I closed my eyes and said Peter dislike a couple of times, and went back to my tutoring. And fortunately, my boss actually apologized and said she'll talk to the students about food in the room, which I kind of didn't. I don't want to restrict the students, but I do want them to keep their food neat. And the reason I don't want to restrict the students is that sometimes I might have to eat in the classroom as well. Right? It just became a really tricky situation. Anyway, I got to get going. Why don't you guys pray for me, sing along with me, gesture at your screen, hit the dislike. I got to get going though.